Hey, you're listening to BlindSight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Hi there. Welcome to BlindSight, your program on mental health and mental wellness. I'm your host, Bill Lundgren, and I'm very pleased to be with you. And I'm also very pleased to be able to continue my discussion with our guest, Lea Gaffen. Lea, I'm sorry. I'm screwing up your name again.
It's okay.
Welcome aboard, Lea.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Well, where we left off last time, we were talking about you were exploring some marketing to optometrists and people who are likely to see people with vision problems. But it started me thinking, and particularly because I just completed giving a presentation at a conference, that part of what we need to do is to make ourselves as people with blindness, with disabilities, to our colleagues and get in their, basically get in their faces and let them know that they're competent therapists to whom they can refer people who have blindness or have a disability, and help them to see that the fact of having a disability does not mean you're not competent. It just means you have to do things differently.
Right, I agree.
What are your thoughts about that? Are people in your area with blindness letting each other know and letting the community know that we're out there working?
Well, it's actually really challenging. I have reached out to the local, Center for Vision Impairments, and mentioned that I would like to offer my services. I would like to do a support group, and I hear back an initial, I'll email and I'll get an initial response of, yeah, that's great, and then I'll follow up and I never hear back again.
Right.
Or I'll put out on a Facebook group that I'm available, and you get people who respond in comments like, oh, how great, and then there's no follow through. So it's really challenging. And even with the local area, like Association of Mental Health Counselors, I've tried to reach out to them and network, but it's again, a little bit of a challenge because the area is so big and transportation can be a problem.
Right,
and
yeah.
I feel like my colleagues sort of don't know what to do when I show up at a networking event with my guide dog, and they just sort of don't know what to do with me. You know what I mean?
Boy, I know that feeling. One time I was at a workshop and a counselor came up to me and said, how could you be a therapist? You can't see my body language or my facial expression. And I didn't bite the bait, but it just happened at that conference. There was the instructor had us pair off and do some exercises. And I think by the time we finished the exercises, she sort of backed off from her opinion. But she was also a newbie just in training. But I think, exactly as you say, people who are counselors don't know what to do with us because we're different from them, quote unquote, and yet we're not really. But as far as they're concerned, and since I can't see at all, I have some hesitancy just walking around and trying to introduce myself if I'm not sure that there's a person there, because I can just imagine somebody say, oh, that Bill Lundgren, he was talking to a wall. or a light post, a lamp. And, I said, that's going to really help my reputation.
Right, right. Yeah, we all have our internal biases, and I think that's what really comes out when you have someone mention to you, like, "Oh, how can you be a therapist? You're blind," or whatever they said. How you can't see or hear. But the answer in my mind is, knowing what it's like is really to be able to say, well, maybe I just do things differently from you, but I'm still very effective and good at my job.
Right. And also, I think it's important for people who have that disability to be reassured that, yes, we can perform normal function, and we're out there and we're running a business, or we're working with people, and we're competent, and it really can be a matter of our mindset that keeps us from doing some of the things that we really dream about.
Right. I agree 100%. It's so interesting how, like I said, internal prejudices, how much we have about ourselves sometimes too.
Exactly. And the thing is, I also, in my talk to the people that were there, all of whom were sighted, of course, I talked about a lot of the training programs and even the schools may give the impression that these little deers have to be protected from taking any risk, or they may instill in them the idea of being you can't do certain things because you have a disability, and I think that is the most harmful thing, particularly for kids with disabilities, to be told, well, you're not good enough, or you can't do this, when, if you really think about it, we can do pretty much anything you want to do. I talk about driving an 18-wheeler, and I think that may be a little beyond the purview of somebody who's blind. But
For now, because they're making self-driving trucks, so someday.
Well, that's what we can hope for. And a friend of mine said, well, if you decide to drive, let me know so I'll stay off the road.
Right.
But, in a lot of things, it's what I know the National Federation for the Blind talks about. We can do anything we want to do. We just need to do it differently. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was a student at one of their schools, having my fellow students in my apartment, and we were talking, well, can a blind person rob a bank? And we spent quite some time trying to figure out how we could do it, especially with revolving doors and so forth. Not that we were planning to, but when somebody says, "Oh, you can do anything you want to do," then the thing we go to is, "Oh no, we can't."
Right. That's sort of the default answer. But with technology being the way it is now, more and more, I think, the sky's the limit, really. It just all starts with figuring out what you want to do. I think so many people are like just so quick to say, oh, I can't do it, so I'm not going to try.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think sometimes there's a fear of failure. Mm-hmm. And I think we wouldn't have the computer if Steve Jobs had said, well, I failed, so I can't do anything more with it. He kept failing at a lot of things until he came up with the idea of the computer and made the computer work, a personal computer. But if he had decided, well, I failed at X, and we have to take that risk, and we have to be encouraged to take that risk.
Right. To live a full life, I personally think it's important, and if not vital, to take the risks, because you don't want to be, 100 years old and look back and say, well, if only I had more confidence, if only I had done this, then if only I weren't blind, then my life would have been better. Well, with your disability in mind, there are workarounds. So really being able to try to have that confidence to try and to use some of the workarounds, you can get to where you want to be.
Well, how was it for you to dive into being a social worker? Going to school.
When I started out, my vision hadn't, my RP hadn't progressed as much as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
When I started out, like I think I mentioned before, I'd done a lot of hiding and feeling a lot of shame about my vision loss. And I think a big part of that was and it's very ironic because I was doing a lot of work with kids with disabilities, and here I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I wanted to be in the helper role, not the helpee role. One of the most rewarding times I had, which was pretty recent, well, in the past 5 years, I remember I was sitting in a local screening meeting, and there was a parent who brought up their child who had been diagnosed with some vision loss, but the parent was not, English was not their first language. So they're saying the name of what the disease was, and no one knew what the disease was. I think they said Ash syndrome or something. So I did a quick Google search. I was able to Google it, and what came up was Usher syndrome. And I said, oh, is it Usher syndrome? And they said, yes. And I knew all about that. I don't have Usher syndrome, but I know all about it because it's related to RP.
Right.
And I think right there, it was the parent was relieved to see that someone understood because it's a very rare disease. And I also said, and by the way, I have RP, and I was working, and I wasn't, I wasn't like 20. And so I think they were right there encouraged to see that their child may be able to have a quote unquote normal life, become a professional and do whatever. Because my guess is the doctor that met with them said something like, yeah, your child's going to lose their eyesight and their hearing. Here's some resources. Good luck. And so they were like, and the kid was young. I mean, it's a very hard diagnosis. And, but it was very fulfilling for me to have that connection so I can even pass on some of what we're talking about and give the parents some hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so that's what, it's rewarding. That's why I find so much rewarding in the connection with other people dealing with similar struggles.
Well, one of the things, the Surgeon General's report on loneliness talks about how devastating that is. But for a lot of people with blindness, they tend to go into isolation, particularly older people with macular degeneration may just give up and say, I'm going blind, I can't do anything, because that's often the public perception of blindness.
Right.
I remember
and that's why support groups, I think, are so helpful, because you can realize you're not the only one. There are, stores like Maxi Aids, even Amazon. You search for, like, a lot of older people like to play cards. There are large print playing cards. They're probably Braille playing cards. There are all sorts of accommodations that can help you do what you want to do. I mean, it doesn't have to be playing cards. It can be, other things too. But I'm just thinking, like, someone, what they would do if they weren't blind, you can, again, find those workarounds to still do it. And that's the goal. But having the confidence to say, this is what I want, I think that's that's where our mental health kind of can tend to get in the way of getting to what we want.
You got it. And and also, when you're a kid, you tend to listen to your parents. And if your parents don't believe that you can do anything, then you're going to buy into that. And that's what we have to really guard against, because so many things have changed over the years, and accessibility, and really by law, we people have to make provision to help all of us to be able to do what it is that we want to do. And the only thing that stops us is our own belief.
Right. The internal belief that we have. And my guess is I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. And even back then, it was sort of, fortunately, my vision hadn't deteriorated to a large extent at that time. But I just always had this perception of blind people as being a certain way.
Right.
Sort of, even people who had guide dogs, I had this perception, they can't see anything. They just sort of, it's almost like the poster child for someone when you think of handicapped in a negative way.
Right. Jerry's Children, remember? Well, that may have been before your time, when Jerry Lewis would have the muscular dystrophy.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And bring out these sad-looking children and
right.
Yeah, that's the image people have.
Yeah, and it's interesting even now. If I walk around with my guide dog, I don't think people look at me and say, "Oh, you're obviously blind." They'll say, "Oh, are you training your dog?"
Right.
And I'm like, "No, isn't it?" I feel like saying, isn't it obvious that she's pulling me? But I think because I don't necessarily meet that stereotype.
Right. And nor should we. Remember when I was a little kid, there was a man who was blind, or at least he was pretending, who had a tray that was strung around his neck, this tray, and he would sell lavender. And that was the way he made money. Now, somebody watched him for a while and figured out he was making $89,000 a year from people buying lavender from him because they felt sorry for him. And,
wow.
And
that's
was
a lot of lavender he sold.
Right. Sometimes I think, I wonder if I should be selling lavender instead of being a therapist.
Right. Might not be as fulfilling, though.
No, not at all. Well, $89,000 would be.
I mean, you can buy some fulfilling with that.
But you see, that's the image that we have to break by being out there, and encourage others to break, to let parents know, as you did, that isn't the end of the world, that things have changed, and that children who have disabilities can find ways to be fulfilled if they're allowed to think that way.
Right. Well, I remember I read or listened to a book by an author who spoke at one of the Foundation Fighting Blindness conferences, and he used to be a computer programmer, I think, and now he's in business, but I believe he has RP, or he has some other retinal degenerative disease. And he said when he went to college, he noticed his vision was deteriorating to the point where it was very hard for him to read the material he had to do. And he and his mom, I guess, worked together where the mom recorded the books. They did some sort of really, interesting workaround because they weren't widely available at the time. Mm-hmm. So he was able to get through college. And, I think about that, how hard that must have been. And now, I mean, first of all, everything is probably online. Textbooks are mostly online.
Right.
But with our computers, you put on accessibility and it will read it to you. You download an app. Like I get so much junk mail, right? And some letters I actually, need to read, but they're always, the print is extremely small and it's hard for me to read. So I open up my Seeing AI app, I take a picture, it reads it to me. It's just getting better. I mean, it's amazing. And it's not just blind people who benefit, it's people who have reading disabilities. You can speed up the sound of the reading. So if it's a long letter, it doesn't take as long. Like there's so many options now. I feel like, it's just only getting better in terms of accessibility. And
absolutely.
And that's amazing. And like rideshare, didn't exist back in the 40s and 50s. And, and now, if I can't get somewhere, then I can take an Uber or a Lyft. And, I don't need to call a cab. About 15 years ago, I went to a friend's wedding by myself. I was a good friend and there were a bunch of people there and that I knew, but I didn't have anyone to give me a ride. So I took a taxi to the wedding and that was no problem. But coming back, I called the cab to come pick me up. And this was maybe like 10 o'clock at night. And they said, okay, we'll be right there. And I waited by the door. It took them an hour and a half to get to me. And meanwhile, I'm waiting by the door. I had said my goodbyes to everyone. And meanwhile, everybody I had said my goodbyes to was then leaving after I had already said my goodbyes. It was kind of embarrassing because there was like one cab in the area and it was busy. And so finally, like an hour and a half came to pick me up. And that was really, annoying to say the least. But in this day and age, that problem wouldn't exist because Uber and Lyft are pretty much around. And so I do feel grateful that at least at this time, if I'm going to have this disability, that it's now not in, I wasn't born in the 1900s, 1900 or something. And, so this enables me to get around, to do what I need to do. It's seamless. I can even use an app to call Lyft or Uber. So I don't need to squint and strain my eyes to be able to pull it up and things like that. So, that makes me feel a little bit better that it's not as harsh as like when I went to that wedding 15 years ago and I'm just waiting on the one cab in town.
Right. That the problem though with Lyft and Uber, we're having some trouble, particularly those of us who use a dog.
Yes, that can be a problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I whenever I've used them, I haven't had a problem. One or two times someone has tried to charge me extra thinking it's a pet. And I will, argue with them, say it's not. They say like you should have called for Uber Pet because they have a separate like division for pets, I guess. I said it's not a pet, it's a seeing eye dog. And they usually, oblige, and whether it's reluctantly on their part, but they take me. But yes, that adds an extra complication to it because they're reluctant to do it.
Well, I was in another city and visiting some friends, and I called Lyft to get me back to the hotel. And the first one just saw the dog and drove off, and the second one was going to do the same thing. And the doorman, my friend's building, just stepped in front of the cab, and then they had a big fight right there at 10 o'clock at night. But that driver did take me to where I needed to go. But, there's a certain education that has to be involved. I mean, it's, being blind is not smooth sailing, but it requires us to be assertive, to learn to be assertive. And that's true. Whatever we decide to do is to be just, I want to do X, Y, Z, and I'm going to do it rather than what we're told, oh, that's too much bother, or don't do that, and, just do something else. And no, we are free to do whatever it is that we want to do, but we have to want enough to make it happen. And
Right. Well, even like seeing a movie now, I mean, and that it is interesting. Like, yes, it's important to be assertive, which makes some of us, it makes me sometimes a little uncomfortable, which I didn't realize I was uncomfortable being assertive until, like, for example, I saw a movie recently and I asked for audio descriptive headphones, which, by the way, have you ever tried those?
no, I haven't tried those yet.
Oh, it's amazing. It's
Is it?
sort of like I didn't realize how much I was missing in seeing movies
Right.
till now. Now I'm
Well,
like, oh, that, things make so much more sense. Audio description is like a game changer.
oh, yeah, it is a game changer. I do that for theater.
Yeah, for theater too.
Yeah.
But and also for movies. So movie theaters, I don't know if they're like required to have them, but I notice more and more movie theaters do. And recently I went and saw a movie, and I went to 2 different movies. I had 2 different experiences. The first time I was with someone who was also visually impaired, and we were given audio descriptive headphones that did not work.
Oh,
And
yeah.
And of course, they're like sometimes calibrated for people with hearing challenges. Like people just group everybody with a disability together. They're like,
Yeah.
they want a headphone, hand them that.
That's
So
right.
it didn't work. So my friend who is visually impaired left the movie and made sure we got ones that worked. And I'm so grateful that she did. She was assertive. Now, then the second time I went with a non-visually impaired friend, got headphones, different movie theater, got the headphones. They also didn't work. They made it louder, so again, it was for people with hearing challenges. And I was reluctant to get up and go get ones that
I
worked.
know, yeah.
I
know
was
that
able,
feeling.
I feel like I got enough out of the movie, but it's just, I need to force myself to go out. Well, part of it was I didn't have my dog with me, and I would have had to have my friend guide me out of the theater because it was dark and the movie had started and everything.
Yeah.
But it's really finding that balance of being assertive, but also, respectful and polite too. Like I don't think any of us want to, go and make a stink everywhere we go and
Right. Well, you're talking about the difference between assertive and aggressive. Sometimes
Yes.
we feel like we have to be aggressive, and
Yes.
that's not a good move on any of our parts. But at times, we may have to move to that because somebody just doesn't get it.
Exactly. And so at the end of the movie, I went and I shared with the concession or whoever I got the headphones from that it didn't work, and they gave me back my money,
Okay.
which was nice. It didn't really solve the problem.
No,
but
it didn't. It didn't.
For the next time I go, I have to make a point. Sometimes it helps me to plan, if this doesn't work, I'm going to do this. Give myself a to-do list. That ensures I'm going to be assertive. Because it really, it's needed even just as a practice for me to learn how to do and be habituated to.
Right. Well, the thing is, you have a liability, but I think by being a woman, women is kind of frowned on when women are being assertive. And so it's a double whammy because, for a guy to be aggressive, they say, oh, that's okay. But there's still that stigma associated with women being assertive. And when you're blind, you have to be assertive. And, it's like you're going against your training. Is that not true?
I've never really thought about it like that in terms of a woman being assertive and aggressive versus, I think what a woman stereotypically, we don't want to, as women, we don't want to come across as too aggressive or too quote unquote strong or being a pain or things like that. It's sort of those just subtle nuances. No one's ever said to me, Lea, don't be a bother so much. But subtle nuances of that, whereas a man can get away with much more.
Yes.
But before they're sort of looked at as a pain and a bother and
Right. Mm-hmm.
that type of thing. But
Yeah.
so that doesn't weigh in my mind in those moments. But what does is just, I have to go back to, what do I want? I want to be able to enjoy the movie like everyone else. They have this technology, which is here. It should work. I think in that situation where I saw the movie with my non-visually impaired friend, she would have been probably fine if I said, can I hold on to you as you guide me out so I get audio descriptive headphones that work?
Right.
So recognizing when I'm thinking I'm being a bother, but I'm not, if that resonates at all. Like, sometimes I think I'm being a pain more than I'm actually being a pain.
That's right. That's what we tend to, because we want to be nice to everybody, and we want to be, but sometimes being nice, we can be nice, but still say, look, this is what I have to have. And I think movie theaters don't test out the equipment.
Right. I don't think they do at all, because they just handed me some headphones. And they
right.
Were like,
right. And they assume it's right. And we've got to change that. And sometimes we have to be a pain in the neck until they realize that they have, by law, they have to do it. And so.
Right. And I think the motto of, assertive, not aggressive is a really good one, because it's a good distinction to make. Being assertive is different from being aggressive. I think most people don't want to be aggressive, but they group them all together.
Yeah.
It's okay to be assertive, just like if you go to a restaurant and you order the steak and they give you the fish, to be assertive is to say, oh, excuse me, I ordered the steak, you gave me the wrong thing. Being aggressive, of course, is like throwing it on the floor.
Right,
and,
exactly.
I'm never coming back, and then leaving.
Right. Threatening the waiter,
Yeah,
exactly.
threatening the waiter and the restaurant and all that. But it's perfectly reasonable to be assertive.
Yeah, and we have to remember that we have that right. We have that right to be assertive. Now, one of the things that, I was also thinking about is the issue of getting people with mental health issues who have a disability, or specifically people who are blind, to be okay about seeking help. Where anxiety or depression, when it's disabling, we have just as much right to go and get it, and we can't feel ashamed of that on top of the shame that we may have about having a physical disability. But there are a lot of people who just are hesitant because they feel like it's one shame on another.
Right. And I don't know, other than really trying to normalize that we all can really benefit from getting some support when needed. I don't know how to really reach those who really need it and say, it's okay. It's okay to reach out.
Right.
It can only help you.
Yeah, because maybe what's going on is not necessarily a mental health issue. So if you say, I don't like what's happening, instead of sitting with it, to go talk to a counselor and say, is this, something I need to do something about? And you and the counselor can, if the counselor is attuned to the difference between mental health and disabilities, they can be interwoven, or they can be very separate.
Right.
And we want to make sure that people who need the help can feel comfortable getting it and not feel ashamed of being blind and having something else that might be going on, and maybe even understand that their mental health issue may have nothing to do with their having a disability.
Right. Whether it does or doesn't, I tend to think it's something that is so important to be open to,
Yeah.
because it goes back to quality of life, right? We only have one life, on this planet, as far as we know. So my attitude has always been, if you're feeling low, if you're feeling down, then what, and people are saying this might help me, why not try it? Because it's probably not going to make things worse.
Well,
And that's my attitude, but I don't know if other people have that.
That's an attitude we need to develop. Now, one of the really serious issues that people with blindness tend to be a higher rate of problems with drugs and alcohol, but they get enabled by people who say, well, if I were blind, I would be drinking too, or I'd be using
Right.
pills.
Or
too.
I've had family members say, if I were blind, I'd kill myself. I mean,
Right, absolutely.
flat out, close family members say that. Now, number one, why would you say such a thing? Number two, how do you think that makes me feel? But those same people, when I step back and look at it, would say, if I lost my right arm, I'd kill myself. I mean, I think you have to look at people who make statements like that as to that's about those people,
Right.
not about the disability. That's
Right.
about their reaction to perhaps imperfection, or, they just, they don't know what else to say. So they just kind of word vomit a little bit. That's really more about that person than about me.
That's right.
But it takes some perspective to be able to step away from that and not get emotional and just say, that's about them.
That's about them.
But
Exactly.
it happens all the time.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And sometimes because we hear it so much, we almost begin to believe what other people are saying rather than saying to ourselves, no, wait a minute, that isn't the way I think, the way that I want to live. And
Right.
that I can, and this is, I think, something that you and I as therapists have to get out to people. Look, you can be whatever it is you want to be. You just need to work at it. Now, I was fortunate. My mother, I grew up in a time when they didn't have a special ed or any of that. And she was encouraged to put us in a school for the blind. My sister and I both were deaf. We're born deaf, part of the Usher syndrome. And one of the things she would say, you can hear, you just need to try harder, which was a little overstatement, but there's a certain grain of truth to it in that we can do whatever we want. We just need to try until we understand maybe it's not worth it, but at least to try it so we know that we've made the decision, not somebody else.
Right. Well, I just wonder if that. So, did you go to a school for the blind or a school for the deaf?
No, she was able to work it out with the school so that, and we didn't have hearing aids at the time. This was an elementary school. She made arrangements with the teachers in the school. She became good friends with all the teachers, where we sat right in front of the teacher at all times. So I learned to lip read, and that's how I managed to survive. And even in some situations I was in where I could lip read what one person was saying to somebody else across the room, and I tuned in to some interesting conversations that way. That I didn't let them know I was understanding it, but my mother putting pressure and saying, okay, I want my children to be in a regular school, because at that time, and I think in some cases now, the best you can get is a fourth grade education in a deaf school. So she put us right in front of the teacher, even when the teacher had alphabetized the class, in terms of seating arrangement. I was put right in front of the teacher, and that way I was able to make it through. And my sister was able to make it through, and both of us got master's degrees.
That's amazing. It sounds like your mom was a really strong person.
She was a strong person, absolutely. She was very much in tune with what needed to be done for her children to get the best. It was hard work for us because it's a royal pain in the butt to be different from everybody else. But in the long run, it was what helped, and it encouraged me to say, okay, I can do whatever I want. I just need to, as my mother would say, try harder.
Right. But I was thinking at first when you mentioned that about she said you can hear, you just need to try harder. I wonder if that originally disempowered you because there's only so much you can try to hear. It sounds like you found a way to compensate, but you can't really make yourself hear better.
Well, I think, I felt very angry about it. I still, growing up, I say, that was a little bit of overkill. But you see, the opposite would have been even worse.
Right.
And so I give her some grace now that I'm an adult and see the position that she was in. And also...
Well, yeah. Reminds me of the movie Ray. Did you ever see the movie Ray about Ray Charles? I think it was Ray is what it was called.
Right. I never saw it, but I know what you mean.
Oh, so there's a scene in there at the beginning where Ray Charles is a child. I think he's 6, and he's going blind. And the mom, and I'm sure this is fictionalized, but the mom is watching him put his hand right by a hot stove. And she's watching him figure out where the heat is. And as you're watching the movie, you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. He can easily touch the burner. He doesn't see where it is. But the mom is sort of watching in the background, letting him learn how to feel the heat himself.
You got it.
Yeah, and he got it. So, that it's a very powerful scene because you're realizing, she has that tough love where she's like, you're going to need to figure this out. I'm going to watch you and I'll support you, but I'm going to let you figure it out because I'm not always going to be here. So
and sometimes we have to get, some burn, some injury. Not want to avoid major injury, but that's how we learn. Sometimes that's how we learn to say, okay, I don't do that because I can't see it or whatever. But the opposite of being cushioned from trying anything is, I think, more harmful.
Right. Or if someone's doing everything for you, like if the mom in the Ray scene was like, okay, honey, you stay away from the stove. I'll get you. You need this, I'll get it for you. You just stay here. I'll get it. And
you got it.
That would be the worst because he probably would never leave the house. And, who knows
and that's what happened. And that's what happens too many times. And that's why, we have to, those of us who are in the mental health field have to say, hey, try some things. Don't take excessive risk. But, try things out in little bits and see how it works for you, or whether you like it or whatever, and encourage people to at least try and then learn what they can and cannot do.
Exactly. Learn for themselves, not rely on someone telling them you can and can't do this, but
exactly.
Learn for yourself what you can and can't do.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but I want to tell you how much I've enjoyed this exchange with you. And
I've really enjoyed it as well. Thank you again for having me.
And have I hope that people in Florida are tuning in and will remember your name and be able to refer to you, as well as encourage you to talk to different groups about working with people with disabilities, because we need advocates out there.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to say if anyone is listening and is interested in talking with me, just reach out to the show and they'll put you in contact with me.
Okay. Do you want to give a number or an email where people can contact you directly?
I would just say if they can contact the feedback line, and then I'll get that message and we'll go through there.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. What the parent organization is trying to do is establish a resource list, a mental health resource list, so that people can tune in, can contact us and get some names and some ideas from people. And I'm supposed to tell everybody the feedback line to email us is exactly that, feedback@aftersight.org, or to call us and to give feedback, call the feedback line, and that's 702, I'm sorry, 720-712-8856. I'll get that right one of these days. Okay, thank you, and best wishes to all. Look forward to seeing you next time out. Take care.